anything concerning women has always been given the least position in priority ranking.
That's the trouble with being a woman. When you are in a position, you are on trial virtually every single day.
As to this idea that gender equality issues are Western inspired and African women are just copying from the West, in a certain sense, it's a term of abuse thrown at activists whose issues we do not like.
If you are convicted of being a feminist, will there be enough evidence to convict you?
Freedom! Freedom! Freedom!
Ghana, land of freedom, toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors, toils of the brave which have brought freedom.
Women have certain special, unique attributes that they bring to their work, and which men don't have. And men also have certain unique attributes which they bring to their work, which women don't have. And you need the two together if you want full development in your country.
Mrs. Jaggi was somebody who really pushed issues. She told me that she became a high court judge because of Nkrumah. She said there was some national function or other, and Nkrumah came out, and the Chief Justice, Kosa, came out, with him and introduced the judges one after the other. And when Nkrumah got to her, he said, "Are you a High Court judge yet?" And she said, "No." And he turned to Justice Kosa and said, "Why haven't you made a one?" And he said, "Oh, said in Britain doesn't even have one." And said, "They are slow about it. Why should we be slow about it?" And he said, Mr. President, High Court judges are addressed as my lord, and I can't see myself addressing somebody's wife as my lady. And so he asked Mrs. Jaggi whether she minded being addressed as my lord. And she said no. He said, "Make her one."
All our laws are neutrally crafted. There's no discrimination and so. But it's not true. My argument was that the law is neutral, but doesn't protect women. Therefore, does not make for gender equality as we know it, because of all kinds of illegitimate reasons. I would come across people, young people who have gone for an interview, who were very good, but didn't get the jobs because they are young women who are going to get married or who have just gotten married and going to have children. And as far as the private sector, even the public sector was concerned, you are going to go on maternity leave, paid maternity leave, blah, blah, blah.
After national service, I put in a number of applications to other places. And that was when I started to realize some of the gender discrimination in the country. I went to some few places to follow up on my applications. And I was told, for a woman, as soon as we employ you, you will get married, you'll be having children. So we don't want to employ women in our establishment. And I was taken aback. Why so? Because I felt even if I have children, they are vital human assets to the society. So why should I be penalized because I'm a woman and I was going to marry and have children anyway?
While I was doing private practice in the Volta region, people would refer cases relating to women who very often could not pay for their legal fees. And I was astounded at the kind of cases that came to me. The fact that women had to endure these circumstances because they were not economically independent. They had to rely on someone, irrespective of the treatment they were getting, because they were not aware of their rights. It gave me a completely new perspective on the practice of law.
When I was called to the bar in 1972, shortly thereafter, we were invited by 2 senior lawyers, women lawyers, who were already members of the International Federation of Women Lawyers, FIDA. That's not the acronym. The acronym itself is actually Spanish, Federación Internacional de Abogadas. So that's why it's FIDA. Those days, you should remember, there were very few women lawyers. I mean, the class ahead of us, we were the largest group of lawyers of 7 women or so. So everybody ahead of us was, 3, 4. So we started meeting, and then as more of us or more women finished law school, they were brought on board.
In FIDA, we started with how do women see themselves in relation to the law? Does the law play any part in their day-to-day lives? We discovered that it didn't. They didn't even think that. I didn't meet one person who thought law played any role in her day-to-day life. The law was one side, and they lived their lives the way they wanted to. Somehow we got into a conversation of legal aid. How do we use our knowledge and experience and expertise to help the women? So we decided to do a needs assessment. To do the needs assessment, we grouped ourselves and we went to Makola. And we sat with the women. A lot of them were there with their young children.
They have to pay their toll all the time, and yet at the same time, there were no facilities in the market.
They needed help to persuade their husbands to look after their children. Because, it's not all women with children who are married. So if you have a child with a man, it's dicey if you are not married to the man, whether he is going to look after the child. It was a very eye-opening experience for all of us. We came back, we did a feedback, and we decided that, okay, we are going to set up a legal aid center.
By 1985, when we set up the legal aid, that's when we really then became, were able to engage. One of the things that early on that we did, in those days with Ghana Airways, air hostesses, if you became pregnant or if you were above a certain weight, you couldn't fly. When you go on flights, some additional allowances, so it increases your. So when you're dropped from flying, that means your income reduces. So we took it up with the management of Ghana Airways, and we managed to get them to change those regulations.
Then once we started this legal aid, of course, it meant that we also had to start agitating, because a lot of the problems of women stem from intestate succession, especially among the accounts. And I talk about the accounts because I know them more than the other tribes. A husband dies, the family comes, they clear out the wife and children and take over everything. And that's the beginning of hardship for a mother and her children.
The Federation of Gold Coast Women in the early 50s had been agitating about a law that would protect women.
In 1985, that was the year that the intestate succession law had been passed. I would always say this, that the PNDs, in terms of laws promoting women, I think that it did quite well, because it did not take too long. Once they had drawn it up, they just did a bit of consultation around the country for people, and that was it, and it was passed.
Well, actually, I pushed the law. What happened was, so I went to see Mrs. Anijagi, and she said, let me sit you down and tell you what should be done. So I said, Ma'am, I need some paper to be able to write. So she said, I've got a lot of things typed. I'll give them to you. And then put in your character and see if you can submit it. And told me to put a letter on it and send it to the PNDC chairman.
Knowing that laws don't get implemented on their own when people don't know about them. So that's what we FIDA set out to do. And so we started off by going to the markets here in Accra to tell people about it, to go to churches and so on. And then when you start talking about it, people will then come, oh, I have this problem. My husband died. My father died, and this and that and that. So based on that, we decided then to look for an office where people could come and, tell us their story and what we could do to help them.
And when we started the legal aid sector, we were actually focusing on women and children. But then men started coming, and I remember when our first men appeared, do we see to them? I said, we said, let's hear them out. Maybe we can help them, maybe we can't. So in the end, everybody was welcome there, men, women, children.
Within less than a year, the one day was not enough. So we expanded it, and before we were aware, we were doing 5 full days of work.
As a senior counselor in the National Council on Women and Development, seeing the suffering of a lot of women, I thought the intestate succession law, it was the best thing to do for now. I had so many cases. In fact, I documented more than 300. That is why, despite the fact that those who were in monogamous marriages were against it, they said children born out of wedlock cannot come and share the same property with their children. And I said, we are not looking at that yet. We don't have any law that regulates anything. So this is just a start. Then later on, we can improve upon it.
In our culture, any child that is acknowledged by their father is not illegitimate. And yet, if the person was married under the ordinance, then a child who was born during the subsistence of a valid marriage was deemed to be illegitimate. So you had a situation where you were illegitimate in one system, but, legitimate. So all of that set up the scene for the intestate succession law.
When my husband died, the first question my junior husband, who is highly educated, a professor, academic, asked me, even before my husband was buried, whether my husband has fully married me. That was where he started. Meaning that if I'm not fully married, even with my children, I don't belong. Professor. Then when we finished the burial and then the 40th day, then he asked me again whether did my husband leave any documents. And I said, yes. Then he left the draft. I printed, photocopied, and then sent it to him before the 40th day. When we came, he said that his interest is the village house. That even the draft will I sent to him, that he's sure, because my husband was sick, under duress, I asked him to sign that that will, it doesn't work. So ask for the village child, he will take it. He had gone into the house. They removed my things and my late husband's things from the bedroom, brought them to the hall, and put his things and his wife's things. So I also went and removed his things, brought them to the hall, and packed my things back. I didn't give it to him. Now that my husband is there, I'm well because I'm alone.
It was very difficult for women to become adversarial in their issues with men. They did not like the court option. Even when the matters were not resolved amicably, they preferred to leave it. They would often say things like, oh, I can't take the father of my children to court. I believe that if our society was more gender equal or was more respectful of women's citizenship, many of the problems we're seeing at FIDA would not be there. And yet the need was getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
When we began WACAM, we thought it was some group of young activists trying to support community people who were distressed and whose rights were violated. So we began with 8 communities. And then later on, we saw that the whole area was influenced by mining activities. We decided to move into communities to get community people sensitized on the need to be aware of the implications of changing from underground mining to surface mining and how that was going to affect the use of lands for other economic and livelihood purposes, especially for women who depended mainly on the standing forest. They gather fuel wood and snails, mushrooms. In Takwa, the thyme, they were harvesting thyme, the black pepper, and all those things were what they survived on. So I saw this as an opportunity to get the women to understand that with surface mining, you are going to lose your livelihoods. I learned that when compensations were paid, they never got to the women. What we did was to target the women who attended our trainings. We got teachers to train them to be able to write simple English and to read. In our own training, we do everything in the local language. So if it's the Constitution and we are talking about your rights, you should understand your rights in your language. In the case of Dumasi, which is quite close to Pristia, Joanna Menu had a farm. The land was handed over to her by her late mother. She was cultivating her land. And then the company said she has trespassed. And they arrested her and then her farm hands. She said, well, I will represent myself in courts. And then they came to Takwa High Court. She represented herself. She won her case. And she's still cultivating the land. And the company made a mistake of destroying one oil palm tree. He said, well, I wouldn't come to you. You come to my house for us to negotiate. They came and then they negotiated.
Ghana was happy to sign the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. At independence, Ghana pledged to defend freedom and justice. The going has not been exactly easy, but Ghana holds firmly to its pledge and will continue the struggle until victory is won.
I remember going to one of the Trokoshi shrines with about 3 or 4 of my FIDA colleagues. When we got to the area, we had to cross the Volta River in a leaking canoe. It was so frightening. We went. It was a shrine being run by a woman. The fetish priestess was a woman. Most of them are men. So we tried to find a woman to see whether her attitude would be different from the male. We went. We had done all the homework. She knew beforehand that we were coming and so on. But when we got there, and the priestess took over an hour to come. She was really, really furious. So she came to sit down and said they should give us water. The water is raw from the Volta River. My lawyer colleagues, I drank a bit of it. When I drank it, I could see her relaxing. See, Anka would not have been able to have any dialogue with her. Because it was like, who are these book-long people who are coming to disturb me? And going to, at the shrine, they have these huge enclosures where the girls are all in white calico. Some of them were very young. And the concrete is such that there are holes in them. Oh, Missy. I was in tears. So we said, what would it cost to let the girls go? She said she had farms, maize farms and other farms. If you will produce tractors and operators that will do the work, she will let them go because they are the ones who farm for her. Where are we going to get money for the tractors? And while we were there, people were bringing their girls to come and serve the penance for the sins of their ancestors. I came back and I said, listen, this one is not a job that an NGO like us can do. It's much bigger than us. We have to have a coalition of a lot of people with a lot of clout to be able to do it, because it's still going on. Nothing has changed. Because one NGO cannot handle it.
To do a nationwide research on violence against women and children was a major achievement. It was no mean thing. The study findings showed quite clearly that violence against women was a big problem in this country. And we could not continue to think that it was not a problem and that it was a foreign import. Somebody you're interviewing will tell you, describe the way they feel when something has happened to them. That describes in detail, something that she doesn't even have a word for, something like psychological abuse. That this man will do, obekase, otimi yo bibi or yo bibi ne kum wusunsum. The doctors will tell that, the symptoms are classic of psychological abuse. So to write the report, we had to bring on board quite a number of people to write various chapters of the report. And I'm so glad that we did this, because once the report came out, that became our advocacy tool that led to the passage of the domestic violence law.
We have this affirmative action bill. Even the women in parliament oppose it. We have one woman who said, by she's made it, she's in parliament. Why do we need affirmative action? I said, if we looked at it that way, all those of us who are sponsoring affirmative action won't sponsor it because we've all got somewhere.
Internationally, Ghana is held in very high esteem because, after all, we were the first country, sub-Saharan, to introduce affirmative action, 1959-60. And these examples are held up highly in the international arena. They know that Ghana has no lack of sterling personnel, and therefore it does not reflect too well on us that the bill has been delayed.
Whenever there is any bill that is seen to favor or disproportionately affect women, we're subject to endless consultation, and this is what we seem to be going through with this affirmative action bill, So it reaches the stage, then the parliament dies, and then we have to start all over again, and it's really a shame. At the same time, I think they recognize that if indeed the affirmative action bill becomes law, then so many things are going to have to change. And it is that fear of giving up power that is also hindering progress.
Every woman that dares, and I'm using dare because the terrain is so rough, that dares to stand for political office must get the support of all women.
Activism is a challenge at many fronts. Sometimes it's like you take one step forward and it's like you're 3 steps back. Sometimes you don't see the progress.
Mr. President, if you hear me, we would love to have the affirmative action bill turned into law now.